right, I think we have a good number of people here now, so we can just get started. We have a lot of ground to cover. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. So this is a webinar today to go over what the PFDD meeting is, and in particular, what our plans look like. So this is the community webinar and Q&A regarding the upcoming SDS PFDD meeting, in short. The full term for this is the Schwachman-Diamond Syndrome Externally Led Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting. Most of you know me already. My name is Esther Hars. I'm the mother of a child with SDS and the CEO of the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Alliance, and your host for today. And next, please. So briefly, housekeeping items. Today's webinar is hosted on Zoom. The controls are on the bottom of your screen. So that's where you will be able to unmute yourself at the end if we decide to go into live discussions, but we will probably just stick with written questions. The chat box is on the bottom of the screen as well. And so if you have questions along the way, just type them in and we'll try to cover them all at the end. The webinar is recorded and we will share it soon after this meeting today. Briefly about us, what is the SDS Alliance? This is a 501(c)(3) US-based nonprofit organization serving the global SDS community to improve and save the lives of people affected by SDS by focusing on research and therapy development specifically. So our mission is really to give SDS patients and their families more birthdays to celebrate. Next, please. And what is a PFDD meeting? That's probably the biggest question of the day. So as I mentioned, the official term is externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. And this is a really exciting opportunity to inform the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA for short, and other stakeholders about the patient perspectives of living with SDS. Next. And so how did this come about? Why did we decide to host such a meeting and why now? So as mentioned, our focus is really to enable and accelerate therapy development for SDS. And our strategy includes building model systems, developing collaborations, and gather and share data that matter for drug development. And this includes the experiences and stories of patients and caregivers. That is one of the most important pieces of data, actually, that can facilitate and accelerate therapy development for us. Research can only happen if we communicate what we as patients need. The most powerful mechanism to achieve this is a PFDD meeting, where we can share our experiences in a systematic yet relatable human way and be met with a listening ear from stakeholders that can make a difference. So real people from the FDA, the research community, and other stakeholders. And to do this, we don't need to have any scientific or medical knowledge per se. We don't need to be experts in those disciplines. We are already experts in what it's like to live with SDS, and that is what we need to share. The learnings from this meeting will live on far beyond the meeting itself. We will create a voice of the patient report afterwards, which will be filed at the FDA so that researchers in the future or FDA staff that needs information about life with SDS can refer back to that report at any time. Next, please. So this is really your opportunity to be heard, to share your story. This is a one-time opportunity, so PFDD meetings usually are only held once per disease state. And so it doesn't really matter where you live in the world or what stage of the disease you are in. It is really your story and experience that matters. The primary goal is to hear directly from patients and caregivers about their perspectives on living with SDS and their experiences with currently available treatments, maybe even wishes for future treatments. And the outcome of this meeting is really to improve the development of new drugs in the research pipeline and to inform the context in which regulatory decisions will be made for new drugs for SDS. There are several ways in which you can participate, and we will cover them in more detail later today. But basically, you can sign up or apply to be a speaker, a live speaker, or a panelist at the meeting live in Cincinnati on June 4th. Or you can just sign up to be a member of the audience and provide feedback that way. So that can be done in person or virtually. And then we also have opportunities to provide feedback ahead of the meeting, either through the Lens study or through a PFDD survey, both of which are forthcoming. And all these opportunities with the links you can click on and explore and read more about are listed on our PFDD website. So that's sdsalliance.org/PFDD. Very briefly about the logistics. So this will be, the PFDD meeting will be held in a hybrid format on June 4th from about 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. If you're able to come, we would love to welcome you in person. Attending the meeting will be free, and we may even be able to offer a limited number of travel stipends. So more about that later. If you are a speaker or a panelist, we will certainly cover your travel and accommodations. If you're not able to come in person, we would love to have you attend virtually. So that could be through watching the interactive stream and providing feedback through the polling questions that will be posed, or submitting comments via text or voicemail. Next, please. And I would love to extend a huge thank you to our partners, in particular to the Schwachman Diamond Syndrome Foundation. There is really just one big SDS community, and we are really grateful for the foundation to spread the word, to make sure that everybody knows about the meeting and everybody has an opportunity to contribute to the meeting. We would like also to thank the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative Rare as One program. The financial support has been instrumental in the early planning stages of this meeting. And with that, I'd love to introduce our speakers for today, James Valentine and Larry Bauer. They are our consultants to help plan this really, really important meeting. And they're really the most experienced consultants in the field. So with that, I'll hand over the mic.
Thank you so much, Esther. And it's such a pleasure to be here today with the SDS community, those of you that are here live with us, and also in the future, for those of you who are viewing this recording as you're learning about this opportunity to participate in the externally led PFDD meeting. My colleague Larry Bauer and I, we're so pleased to be a part of this planning the meeting. We both are former FDA officials who have a passion and a lot of experience in bringing the patient voice into the process. And so we'll be sharing some of our learnings with you today to help you be best prepared in participating, and hopefully it'll help inform your decision about participating in the meeting. So Larry and I are going to do a little bit of a deeper dive for you, talking about this opportunity, but also where the input from this meeting actually will help inform drug development and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, how they use that as part of the drug development process. So I'll start today giving you some background on the FDA and drug development. This may be a refresher for some of you. but we want to make sure that the entire community has the opportunity to learn about the process that this PFDD meeting will be informing. And then my colleague Larry will take it from there to talk a little bit more about the meeting itself and give you some more details, building on what Esther already shared with you already. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into our first topic, which is to orient you a little bit to the overall process. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a sense of, how drugs are developed, where FDA fits in, because it's always valuable to understand our audience when we're having these types of meetings, because you'll be speaking and FDA will be directly hearing from your voices, people living with SDS, direct family caregivers of people living with SDS. So the process we'll talk through from the kind of beginning to end at a high level. And the very first part of this process is drug discovery. So it's important to know that from the very beginning, kind of the type of research that maybe academic institutions, the National Institutes of Health are doing, research that, your patient advocacy organizations are helping fund, are leading to learning about the disease in a way that not only might help, treating clinicians, but also drug developers, because drug developers are looking to try to find different compounds that might help intervene and either stop or reverse the effects of a disease. But we need to know at a kind of a biological level what's going on to see where those opportunities to intervene might be. When we're looking and trying to identify those compounds, we can either be doing that by looking at existing treatments. There's a lot of treatments that have gone through different stages of development, maybe even are approved for other diseases that might have certain characteristics, unanticipated effects even, that might plug and play or help treat certain symptoms of a disease. And then certainly as medicine and medical research advances, we're getting new technologies, including cell and gene therapy that are allowing us to be more targeted in our approach to trying to treat more upstream, the root cause of a disease. So once researchers have done this, this biological, understanding of the disease, and we've started to identify one or more promising compounds, we then move out of the research and discovery stage really into drug development. And that drug development path is pretty well established, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. And so you'll see that process across the bottom of the slide here as we move through the different stages of development, which we'll talk about briefly each of those. So when these products are identified, before they're ever tested in humans, which is what we call clinical research, preclinical work needs to be done first. We need to understand if that product is reasonably safe for initial use in humans. We also need some information to know whether, it's sufficiently effective in addressing the disease target. And we can do this with different kind of laboratory, kind of petri dish type experiments, or sometimes we have animal models of a disease where we are actually able to see if we're treating the animals with the disease, the animal version of the disease, to give us some idea if the drug may work in humans. And so once this information, the safety information, is called the toxicology, the effectiveness information is called pharmacology. Once we have those experiments done, then that information can be taken to the FDA in what's called an investigational new drug application, or IND. And that IND application is a request to be able to start human trials or clinical trials. Now, clinical trials go through a number of phases, starting with the smallest and shortest studies, working all the way to late stage or phase 3, which are our largest and longest studies. And so to go into phase 1, as I mentioned, you first need that IND application. That application includes those non-clinical studies, the pharmacology and toxicology we just talked about. It also includes an important third prong of information. So not just how safe the drug is, how likely the drug is to work, but also we want information on the quality of the drug, how it's manufactured, because the manufacturing of the drug is important. We want to make sure that when it gets into a person or into a patient, that you have the right amount of the active ingredient every time it's manufactured. We want to make sure that there's controls in the manufacturing process, so there's not harmful things being included in the product that might result in safety events for patients just from the manufacturing process itself. We want it to be very controlled, very safe, very uniform. And so some information about that is included, as well as the proposal for the first clinical trial. Clinical trials, their protocols are the study plans. And so that is included along with other investigator information for FDA to review. And so they get this package, and they have 30 days to look at it. And usually the first study that's being proposed is called a phase 1 clinical trial. And as I mentioned, these are the smallest and shortest studies. And the emphasis at this point is really on drug safety. We might just be starting with a single dose of the drug. And we start at the lowest dose and, one at a time, one patient at a time, one dose at a time, work our way up to higher doses. And then once we've done that, then maybe we'll give repeat doses. So we'll give, some number of multiple doses, again, starting with lower doses, working our way up. And by doing this in a small number of people, we're able to see those most common side effects. We also get to see where the drug goes in the body, how long it stays there, which is important information to know, what dose is the right dose, to carry forward into future clinical trials. So all of this, kind of phase 1, it's, very rudimentary. We want to make sure that we don't see really serious safety concerns right off the bat before we start exposing more and more people to this new drug. Once we've done that, we can then propose going into phase 2. Often, there is a meeting with FDA that will happen, or at least the proposal will be sent to FDA to review. These studies are a little bit larger. They are starting to now look at the drug's effectiveness. So because of that, we sometimes call these proof of concept studies. You might hear that term thrown around. In this setting, because we're starting to look at how the drug actually works in terms of potential benefit or that proof of concept, these studies are always done in individuals living with a particular disease. Phase 1, on the other hand, can sometimes be done in healthy volunteers, meaning people who don't have a particular disease or condition. Since we're mostly looking at safety, here, anytime we want to look at how a drug works, we have to look at it in people living with the particular disease, so we can actually observe and see whether that's happening. In phase 2, we might actually start to compare how the drug works against a control group. The most common kind of control is a placebo control. You might have heard of this, sometimes referred to as like the sugar pill. This is just to see what is really being driven by the drug versus what is, just the effect of being in a clinical trial, where maybe you're getting more care than you would normally get outside of a clinical trial, or even the hope that something might be happening because you're in a clinical trial. Of course, safety is always going to be important. You'll see this across all phases of clinical trials. So as you start, giving people longer dosing of a product, you want to start to see if there's any side effects that start to appear as a result of people being exposed to more of the product over time. Once you've done these proof of concept studies and presuming that you actually have some of this early evidence that the drug is working in patients, you then can move into phase 3. These are sometimes referred to, you might have heard the terms of a registrational study or a pivotal trial. Phase 3 are the largest scale, almost always, but not always, randomized placebo-controlled trials. These are longer term, particularly for chronic, conditions. So, not treating an acute infection, but, treating an actual condition that people live with over time. You're going to want to actually dose people for a long period of time because this might be a lifelong treatment for them. And so you want a relatively, long amount of dosing so you can see what the long-term benefits are. These are also the largest studies. So by having more people, you can actually see how the drug works in different populations. So that could be different age ranges, where people are at different points in their progression of the condition or, severity level. You can actually start to look at different groups. Of course, in a rare disease, that's hard because we're talking about very small numbers to begin with, but it's always something that you're best able to look at in phase 3. At phase 3, you still might be looking at a couple different doses of the drug or dosing regimens. And as I mentioned, safety evaluation always is happening and continues. In these phase 3 studies, you might be able to also start looking at drug-drug interactions because you're expanding this to a broader group of people that might be included in phase 1 or 2. And so they might be taking other drugs that are common, within the patient population. Now, I've talked about this as phase 1, and then phase 2, and then phase 3. In rare diseases, often what happens is these phases get merged together. We're talking, every patient is precious in a rare disease setting. And so because of that, often sometimes phase 1 or 2 will get combined together, or phase 2 and 3 gets combined together. In some in some situations, they might get all condensed together, especially if the drug has already been approved for another disease or condition. So once all of the clinical trials are done, what happens? Well, all of that information is put together in a marketing application that's submitted to the FDA. These marketing applications are referred to as new drug applications, or NDAs, or biologics license applications, or BLAs. For our purposes, they're essentially the same thing. NDAs apply to small molecule drugs. BLAs apply to biological products like vaccines and gene therapies. But the requirements for approval are essentially the same. And so how does a company or another drug developer get to this point? Well, they hold a meeting with the FDA called a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. The idea is to bring all of that clinical and even that preclinical information, everything we've talked about, put it all on the table. Say, here's where we think we've demonstrated that the drug works and that it's safe. Here's how we would plan to provide all of our analyses to you, and see if there's any major unresolved issues. You want to try to figure that all out before you submit the application, and FDA rolls up its sleeve to really get into the data. You want to make sure there's no major gaps or additional information that needs to be generated. But assuming that there's some alignment on that the NDA or BLA is ready for FDA's review, then it gets all put together and submitted to the FDA. When FDA is doing its review, it first looks to make sure it has a complete application. It will then assign a review team to do the review. And while it's doing this, it's looking at the same things that we talked about from the very beginning of drug development, but now in a more comprehensive way. Has the drug shown that it's effective in the particular patient population it was studied in? Once we know how effective it is, we can then look at the safety profile and say, do the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks? So is it adequately safe? And then that third prong that I mentioned about manufacturing and quality, that gets looked at because this drug is, if approved, it's going to go out to a lot more people, and so it's going to be manufactured at larger scale. And you want to make sure that that scale up of manufacturing is done in an equally safe way, or even a more safe way than it was before. While FDA is doing its review, which takes a number of months, between 6 and 10 months, depending on which type of review you get, FDA can seek outside input. So they might go to outside experts. And this is called, they have these panels of outside experts called advisory committees. And so FDA would convene a meeting of their advisory committee and seek that input. And those advisory committees vote. And sometimes the news covers this and says, the advisory committee voted to support approval or voted against the approval of a drug. One thing that you should know is that these committees' input, they're advisory. It's still FDA's decision, and FDA can disagree with the advisory committee when making that decision. The job is not done even once a drug's approved, both for the drug company as well as for FDA. They're continuously looking at the experience as the drug then goes out and is used and prescribed by doctors. And so primarily in this stage, they're looking for safety information to make sure that there isn't a change as we learn more in that benefit risk profile. So we've talked a little bit about FDA's or the drug development process, how a drug goes from being discovered all the way to it getting prescribed by your doctor. what is a little bit more about FDA's role in that? Because we're going to be talking to FDA at this PFDD meeting, so it's good to know where FDA fits into this. Well, a couple of things about FDA's role in drug development is to know that FDA is not the one actually developing drugs. It's researchers, pharmaceutical companies, even sometimes nonprofit groups that are actually doing this research, or it's sometimes called sponsoring the research. FDA is also not the one that's testing drugs and trials. So FDA is not running clinical trials. Their staff are not on site. This is all being done by researchers who are either doing this themselves or hired by drug companies to do these clinical trials. And as I mentioned, those protocols, the study designs are put in front of FDA for approval before they can begin. But again, FDA is not the one actually doing these and can't force a company to do a clinical trial. Another thing to mention is once a drug is approved, FDA's role is limited. FDA is not regulating the practice of medicine, so they don't regulate your doctors. They regulate how drugs are developed and how companies can market those products. But doctors are free to prescribe FDA-approved drugs for other conditions. This is called off-label use. So doctors can do more with drugs if they believe the science and research supports it. FDA also does not regulate the price of medicine or whether an insurance company will cover it. So issues around access to drugs are kind of outside of FDA's mandate. They don't have that information, and even if they did have information about how much a drug would cost, their regulatory framework doesn't allow them to consider that. It's really a benefit risk decision, not a cost benefit decision they're making. So I've mentioned a lot of things of what FDA doesn't do. So let me mention about some of the role that they do play. So in addition to protecting the public health, FDA has a mission to help promote the public health. And so FDA reviewers, you might imagine, they're looking at every drug and seeing the data, for every drug, not only those that are successful, but those that fail to either show benefit or have a positive benefit risk overall. And so they know a lot about how to best design trials, and they can provide that technical information and expertise to researchers and drug developers. And those happen through those meetings that occur all throughout development. I could have put on that little kind of map across the bottom, I could have put arrows all along the way to show the different interactions. So they're helping FDA design studies. They have these numerous meetings to help do that and bring that technical expertise because they want to help facilitate product development. So we've covered a lot of this at a high level on how drugs get developed and other information about the FDA. FDA has resources on their website that you can go to, fda.gov/for-patients, if you want to learn even more than what we covered today. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Larry Bauer, who's now going to talk really about what you want to know, which is where does your voice as a patient or caregiver fit into this?
Thanks, James. Thanks for that great overview on drug development, which I hope provides you with a foundation of why we're doing the meeting. So as Esther mentioned earlier, the meeting we're preparing for is called a patient-focused drug development meeting. Next slide. So the purpose of this meeting is, the FDA, as they, James talked about all these different steps of reviewing data and reviewing clinical studies for the development of new drugs. Well, the FDA realized there was an important voice that was missing from their knowledge, and that was the voice of people actually living with the condition and their caregivers. So FDA said, we want to hear from them. So they wanted to develop a more systematic way to gather the patient and caregiver perspective about different conditions, especially for rare diseases that they don't know that much about. This kind of information would really help inform their understanding of the disease so that when they're evaluating the potential benefits and the risks of a new drug, it would help them in making decisions about that. And especially this will also help them too at the end of the process, like when James said they turn in all of their data to the FDA, it will help them in their review and decision-making about whether or not to approve the drug. Next slide. So I mentioned something called benefit risks. So the FDA goes through a formal process of looking at the data and trying to understand the disease so they can evaluate what are the potential benefits of this new drug that's being proposed in contrast to what are the risks. We know that every drug has side effects, it can have downsides. Sometimes there's challenges with the route of administration, like if you have to give an injection all the time or if you have to take it by IV or something like that. So the FDA, they formally collect this data. One of the things they do is to analyze the disease or condition, and they want to also understand what are the current treatment options for that disease. For instance, are there other FDA-approved treatments, or are people just treating the symptoms of the disease because there's no FDA-approved treatments? And how effective are the currently available treatments for that disease? Understanding this helps them understand what is the unmet medical need for this community. Like, what is it that this community still needs, and what are the big symptoms that people experience that maybe have poor treatment, little treatment, or even no treatment? Next slide. So the FDA came up with this process of something called patient-focused drug development meetings. They did an experiment, and they did 26 of these meetings on their own for different conditions. They met with people with the disease. They asked them questions. They heard from them. They listened to their stories. And then they wrote up everything at the end of the day into a report called the Voice of the Patient Report. They found this to be a very successful way of getting this kind of information, but they said we can't do this for every disease, especially every rare disease. There's over 7,000 of them. So we're going to turn this over to advocacy organizations and let them run the meeting. We'll still come and listen and learn, but the advocacy organization will hold the meeting, and that's why it's called externally led. It's external to the FDA. So the FDA, when they turned this process over, one of the things that they emphasized to us is that active patient involvement and participation is the key to the success of these meetings. Next slide. As I mentioned, after we have the meeting, everything that we hear will be written up into a Voice of the Patient report. This is a summary of patient and caregiver and audience testimony. We're going to do some live polling on telephones, so that data will be included, as well as people writing in with written comments. We'll put all of that information into the Voice of the Patient report. This document then becomes a key communication for the FDA review staff, as well as drug developers. So if there's a new drug developer wanting to develop something for SDS, they will probably go to this Voice of the Patient report to read it, to learn about it. What is the lived experience? What are the most important symptoms that people talked about? And as James mentioned, that this really helps, in the treatment of development of new treatments for SDS. So next. So now into the nitty-gritty. How can you participate in the meeting? So who is the meeting for? It's for SDS patients and caregivers. We hope as many staff from the FDA will come and listen. Pharmaceutical industry, biotech companies, and anyone interested in learning. It's a public meeting, so anyone can attend, your family, friends, coworkers. It'll take place on June 4th from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. As Esther mentioned, this is going to be taking place in person in Cincinnati, but it will also be virtual. So that's what she meant when she said it's a hybrid meeting. So people will be able to attend on their computer, like we're attending today, from all over the world. And this is a link here to the interactive live stream for the meeting. Next slide. So just to go over what the agenda on the day of the meeting is going to look like. We'll first have some welcome and introductory comments from the SDS Alliance, as well as a speaker from the FDA will present. Then we're going to have about a 10-minute clinical overview and background of SDS provided by an expert, so one of the doctors that treats your families. And then the rest of the day will be divided into two main topics. The first topic is what kind of SDS symptoms affect your life? So what symptoms do you or your loved one, what do you have, and what are those symptoms like? And which of those symptoms are the most challenging? And then in the afternoon, we'll shift gears a little bit to how do you manage those symptoms and what are the current treatments that you might be using, as well as what are your hopes for the development of future treatments to treat SDS. These topics will include some patient panels and polling questions and a moderated live discussion with you. And then at the end of the day, we'll have a summary where we just summarize everything that we heard and talk about some next steps. Next slide. So some of the questions that we'll be talking about on the day of the meeting, Esther mentioned that you don't have to have a scientific background to participate. You have to have the lived experience of living with SDS. So the first topic about symptoms and daily impacts, we might ask of all the symptoms of SDS, which 1 to 3 symptoms have the most significant impact on your lives? How does SDS affect you or your loved one on your best and on your worst days? And maybe describe what's a good day and what's a really difficult day. And then are there specific activities that are important to you or your loved one that maybe you can't do at all or as fully as you would like because of impacts of SDS? Next slide. And continuing with this topic also, how have the symptoms changed over time? So maybe, when you were first diagnosed, the symptoms looked like this, but now we're several years into it and the symptoms have changed, and morphed over time. How has the ability to cope with those symptoms changed over time? And then also, what do you fear the most as you or your loved one gets older? So what are your thoughts about the future? And what frustrates you the most about you or your loved one's condition? Next slide. So then I mentioned we'll take a break for lunch. When we come back from lunch, we're going to shift gears and talk more and focus on.
So I'm happy to pick up here, and hopefully we'll get Larry back here shortly to be part of the Q&A discussion. But as Larry was saying, once we've in that first topic, really understand what it is that you're going through and living with the disease or condition, we also want to understand your experiences with treatments. And when we talk about treatments, we cast a really broad net. We're not just talking about medicines, although certainly we want to hear about what you're doing and your doctors are maybe guiding you to do, or for your loved ones. But what alternative treatments or lifestyle modifications and the like, anything that you or your loved one do to try to make living with SDS and its symptoms a little bit easier, we kind of count as that under this broad treatment category. And so we're going to ask how those treatments are working, even if in small ways, to make life a little easier. Of course, also want to know where they're not working and what are the gaps. For those treatments, we want to hear about downsides. So, what are things that maybe are burdensome or side effects of treatments that you can tell us about? And then what we'll do in ending that discussion is really focus on the future and ask for your preferences, short of a complete cure for SDS, something we all want. We want to know what short of that actually would be meaningful for you. And so we want to ask you about what specific things you'd be looking for from ideal treatments. And this is going to help FDA calibrate, what their expectations are for treatments and make sure that what's being measured in studies aligns with what your needs are. And so how will we actually hear from you as part of this? Well, as Esther and Larry have both already mentioned, there's going to be a panel of patient and caregivers who will be sharing their stories. Again, if you are interested in applying to be a speaker or panelist, there's an opportunity to do so now on the PFDD website. But it is a live public meeting, and so we want more than just our panelists to be there. We want other patients and caregivers to be in the audience, both in person and online, to help answer these questions. Think of it as like a focus group. Or a town hall style event. And we'll be asking questions, including polling questions and questions for people in the room to raise their hand and answer those questions that we just went through. And there'll be opportunities for people online to submit or share their experiences. So all of this is going to help build on those different topics, build on what we've heard, and really together help paint a picture for FDA of what it is to live with SDS and what your needs are for future treatments. So a couple of just tips for effective participation. Remember what I talked about at the beginning. What is FDA's role? What is the purpose of the meeting? This is really to inform FDA. So some topics are going to be out of scope for the meeting. We're really focused on helping that clinical trial and drug approval process. So issues around insurance coverage and price. This is not the meeting to go into those issues. If you want to know, well, what are the issues we should talk about, come back to this presentation or go to the PFDD webpage on the SDS Alliance website, and you'll see what questions that we have that we are going to be asking as part of the discussion. Know that if you have something important to share, kind of look and see what those different topics are, so that way you can bring it up at the right time during the meeting. And know that it's okay, and we actually want you to reiterate and share things that others people have heard. So even if someone's already said something that you feel, is your experience too, or is how you feel also, it's actually good for FDA to hear that multiple people share that experience or that feeling. Just give us your own personal take. Everybody's experience is a little different. Our hope is that we'll be able to hear as many voices as possible. That's our goal. And so we always just want to be considerate of one another. And so we'll be asking that comments are concise and focused. People are very much welcome to contribute, multiple times throughout the day. But for each question that we're on, we want to bring in as many voices as possible. And just to note that if at the end of the day, when you leave that meeting, or maybe you're only able to attend parts of it, that if you weren't able to provide all of the comments that you wanted, we'll be collecting comments both before and after the meeting, and we'll be including those in that Voice of the Patient summary report. So again, you can participate in the meeting either in person or remotely. We encourage you to pre-register, which will open in a week or two. You hear this you've heard us throughout the entire presentation. Just go to the PFDD webpage on the SDS Alliance website, which is right here, the link. This is where all information is going to be posted throughout the process. And once you're pre-registered, you'll also be signed up to receive notifications and updates of new information as it becomes available. So keep your eye open in the next week or two to pre-register, and you'll kind of be then part of this process moving forward. You'll also, again, be hearing about an opportunity to submit comments ahead of the meeting. That's very helpful to us. And again, even those comments that aren't able to be shared live during the meeting will go into that Voice of the Patient report. So in summary, as was the goal of this, when Larry and I were both at FDA helping develop this program, this is your opportunity to be part of the process. You can really have a meaningful impact on trial design and drug development. We've seen it firsthand. We know that there's multiple decisions that FDA makes from those early stage phase 1, even before phase 1 clinical trials, in terms of how that informs how trials are designed, all the way through that approval decision when FDA has all the data and they're weighing the benefits and risks. Your voices are going to, whether you know it or not, are going to be informing those decisions all throughout. But in order for us to be successful in doing that, we need your collective voices. We need your voices to be heard. And so we hope that you'll be there to help us make a difference collectively. So with that, we're going to go to Q&A. It looks like we've got Larry back as well.
Yeah, thanks.
So no worries at all. I'm going to stop sharing here. I know there's been a couple of questions in chat. So we can take those, and we're, of course, very eager to hear other questions that you have.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, go ahead, Esther.
Yeah, should I highlight the questions, or do you want to?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So maybe we can start with the last question. Joan is asking, how interested do we expect the FDA to be if we don't even have a drug currently in the development process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of my background is that when I was at the FDA, I helped co-found the Rare Diseases Program back in 2010. It was a new program in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So I was very involved in rare disease work at the FDA. I have to confess that while I was there, I never heard of SDS. So, I was working in rare diseases. That was the whole focus of my work, and I had not heard of it. So I can imagine that there are many people at the FDA that are not familiar with SDS. So my prediction is that there will be a great interest. You know, people at the FDA they're scientists, they're physicians, they are always wanting to learn, and we are all looking forward and hopeful that there will be many new treatments for SDS on the horizon. So they will be interested learning about it now, and then, like we said, when they have the voice of the patient report in hand, when a new drug does come to them, or a drug company proposes a new clinical trial, they will go back to that report and read again about what did they hear from the patients and caregivers of people living with SDS. So I think they'll be very interested.
And just so you know, the FDA has to give you the permission to have one of these meetings. So they've already considered whether they think that there's value to having a meeting on SDS and have said, yes, please have one of these meetings.
Yeah.
Thank you. The question is from a little bit earlier, but some people felt curious about that too. What happens to this process if the FDA, is undergoing some changes within the next few months? I think my quick comment is that there's a benefit to doing the externally led version of this meeting, because we are doing the heavy lifting of the planning, and so hopefully the impact will be smaller that way. But I'm curious what you think, James and Larry.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say, and obviously there's no crystal ball to know what the landscape will look like. But what I can say is there's been disruptions before. Larry and I have both lived through, both when we were at FDA and since, government shutdowns and furloughs. What I can say is FDA staff, even when they technically weren't getting paid, still showed up to these meetings. And so, as long as they're, our FDA staff who are doing work, even if this isn't a priority, or things are kind of being paused, kind of big picture for FDA, that FDA staff, they're still rolling up their sleeves. They're committed to the public health. And so I expect that, chances are there's not going to be something so transformational that impacts this process. But as Esther said, one of the great things about this being externally led is that if there, are any kinds of restrictions being put on public meetings that FDA is having or anything like that, this isn't, this is your community's meeting. And so the meeting will go on. I expect FDA staff will still show up. And at some point, this information is going to live on, both the recording of the meeting and the voice of the patient report. And so it will be able to be used. So it actually, while, we are in kind of a period of transition, and there's been a lot speculated in terms of what might happen. History tells us that this process will still be supported, if not anything, but just by the actual people at FDA who really care. But Larry, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if I did have to make a prediction, don't hold me to this, but I would predict that the pharmaceutical industry that has such a strong investment in the FDA, that they will be putting pressure on this new administration to continue the work of the FDA uninterrupted. There might be changes, but I don't think that the FDA will be gutted, or that it will be shut down as an agency, or anything drastic like that. So I think we're pretty safe to proceed.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the next question is, I'll take maybe Angela's question next, which is, if traveling to the meeting isn't possible, what would be the best way to share the voice? And so one is on the day of the meeting. You can watch the live stream and engage in the live opportunities to contribute your voice. So there will be polls, and there will be also opportunities to either call in or leave a voicemail and a text message. So that will be on the day of the meeting. And also before and after the meeting, you can also contribute your voice through surveys or written comments of any kind. we will monitor and collect all the input.
Yeah, I will just second what Esther just said. And if you can't be there in person, we understand, that's the whole reason for having the virtual option. I will say if you can join virtually live on the meeting day, that's the next best thing to being there in person. We want to hear from as many voices as possible on the live meeting day. We also, though, of course, recognize that not everyone, can make that happen. Maybe you have to work a shift and you can't be there during that time, or you have doctor's appointments. And so the next best thing after that is to submit information ahead of the meeting, because if you submit it ahead of the meeting, we'll actually be able to have the opportunity to share some of that during the meeting. But of course, at the end of the day, anything you submit before, during, or after will all be included in the Voice of the Patient report.
Let's see. I think next question. Would you recommend both the survey and the virtual attendance? Yes. The more ways you can contribute your voice, the better. Absolutely. And next question about the selection of panelists and speakers. Is that random? And if not random, how are they selected? I can speak a little bit to that. It is not completely random. We are looking to make sure that we cover a representative set of experiences and also cover all the important aspects of the disease. So we will go through with James and Larry together, we will go through the submissions and make sure that the panelists are selected in a way that will represent the whole community. So not completely random, but we are trying to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, those panelists, there's a limited number of just time-wise at the meeting, a limited number of those that we can have. And so we do want to make sure that we, in those situations, have the broadest range of experiences to include, as Esther said, we want to make sure it's representative. That being said, then the rest of the live discussion is open to the whole community. And so, it's a balance of trying to get, and not just different disease experiences, but as, I kind of picked up from Larry's part of the presentation, also treatment experiences. And so if you apply, you'll see that there, we'll be asking about both types of experiences so we can try to get good representation across, the range of different topics we're covering.
And there was a question from a little bit earlier. How can we promote pharmaceutical companies to attend our meeting? And then there's another one related to drug developers, which is asking about, how long does it take for the different stages of drug development, and so how, like, what's the scale? So the two questions are not exactly related. I would say, and I'll let you guys cover it in more detail, but pharmaceutical companies and drug developers, all those companies are very, very welcome to attend, to learn from us and build connections. So we have put out the word to many of them where we know that they have an interest in the SDS space. And the doors are wide open for them to come. And if they are not able to come in person or not on that day, again, the Voice of the Patient report will be a resource that lives on for them to refer back anytime they are thinking about developing something for SDS.
Yeah, it'll be the job of Esther and everyone in the SDS advocacy space to help get the word out about the meeting, and then, so that as many people will come as possible. And then, like Esther said, we also will have the recording of the meeting available for future companies, as well as the Voice of the Patient report. And then the good question, oh, go ahead, James.
I'll just add one last little thing here, which is you never know, just from working with industry, who may have something sitting somewhere that might be useful for SDS. there's so many drugs being developed. So if you happen to know someone that works in industry, even if they don't have something, in development for SDS, invite them. This is an open meeting. As Larry said, people are, there's people in this field, whether at FDA or industry, love learning. And it's, particularly in rare diseases, there's so much to learn from these because the information doesn't exist in the literature or medical textbooks. And so, you should cast a wide net too and inviting people to come and listen and learn. And who knows, maybe that person that that works in some company, they connect the dots, and we've actually seen PFDD meetings increase the number of products in development after a PFDD meeting because it puts the disease or condition on the map.
Yeah, and we will also do outreach to the academic community. So people that are working maybe at universities that are doing research into SDS, they will also be informed, and we hope that they will turn out to listen and learn as well, because they are part of this greater community that's involved in new product development. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of the question, Esther, was how long do the different stages take? This is very subjective. It always takes years from beginning to end. As far as the actual clinical trial goes, it depends upon, some drugs that are administered are taken by mouth. They're short acting. They go into your system. They're metabolized within, 2 to 5 days or something like that. And then your body does something to, get rid of the drug. So those kind of trials take shorter time. If it's a drug or a gene therapy being developed that has to take a long time to take effect, that you have to watch it over time, those trials then, of course, will take a longer period of time. So there's a huge level of variability in drug development timelines. So.
Yeah, soup to nuts, start to end, that normal average is about 10 years. So if it's a drug that's already been approved for something else, sometimes some of those early stage trials can be cut out, but you still have to show that it works and it's safe in every population that you're trying to get, maybe expand the approval into. And that can still take a number of years. So that's why having this patient input so early, you want to get it right the first time, because one thing that extends drug development is getting the designs wrong. And in rare diseases, that you're at higher risk of that. You have less experience. This isn't the 20th antihypertensive being developed where you can follow the playbook. You're going to be, the analogy is, you're building the plane while flying it. And so, these types of meetings become so important because, it gives you so much better insights into what you might be assessing, how you go about doing those assessments. And the more things we get right, the better and quicker products can get through that pipeline.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's why the patient voice can actually make things faster and better and save a lot of money actually also along the way. So we do have one more question, but it may not completely fit into the scope. So I think I'll close the official part of the meeting here. Maybe just answer Joan's question about the funding for the different stages of drug development. It's typically privately funded by companies, especially the later stages. But earlier ones, there might be some public funding available for earlier stages of drug development, but it's all over the place. And we can continue the discussion in a minute, but I wanted to thank everybody for attending and putting forth the great questions. Especially want to thank James and Larry for this great overview of what we are about to embark on. And if you have any follow-up questions to the audience, email me and we'll get them answered for you. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, it was great to be with everyone. I'll leave you with Esther, but we look forward to working with this community in the coming months.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.